Oh, okay. So today and this week, our celebrity of the week is a person that you may have thought was a myth or a folk tale. And there are lots of myths and folk tales associated with him, but he was a real man. So his name was not actually Johnny Appleseed, but that's what they called him, and we'll find out why now. Johnny Appleseed. In the early days of the American frontier, when most of this nation was still wild, unsettled land, there lived a man of great courage and gentleness. He traveled through the wilderness, planting apple trees. His name was John Chapman, though he came to be known to generations of Americans as Johnny Appleseed. This is one story about his gift to our country. These apple trees were planted here a century ago. 100 years of springtime bloom, 100 years of snow. 100 apple autumns with the wild geese flying by, 100 years of applesauce and steaming apple pie. The man who planted apple trees once stood here on this land, a sack of seeds upon his back and a Bible in his hand. Young Hannah Goodwin saw him first, a stranger lean and lorn. His face was thin, his feet were bare, his clothing old and worn. The Goodwin family asked him in to dine and talk a while. America was lonely then, he'd traveled many a mile. He said he'd gladly stay to sup, but could not linger here. He had to go plant apple trees across the great frontier. He said it was a great wide, wild land, a lonesome land and long. He said his apples, sharp and sweet, would make the country strong. The family listened while he spoke of forests green and grand, of prairies vast and waving grass, of rivers ribbed in sand. He spoke of families like their own, all moving bravely west, with guns and tots and cooking pots to claim the wilderness. He said he'd bring them apple trees, our Lord's gift to the earth. He said the sun would warm his seeds, the rain would give them birth. He said that each good orchard grown would bear fruit as God planned, and give the yearning pioneers a taste of promised land. The Goodwin family wished him well, and watched him leave alone. He carried neither gun nor knife, nor weapon did he own. For though he walked alone and lorn, through dangerous land and wild, he said he'd harm no creature born. Each one was God's own child. Young Hannah heard the tales of him all through her growing years, as he brought apples sharp and sweet to other pioneers. She heard he walked through day and night, and through the winds that moan. She heard he walked in snow and rain that chilled him to the bone. And where he walked, she heard he gave his blessing softly thrown, the scattered seeds among the weeds, the sweet fruit wisely grown. She heard he loved the forest land, and all its creatures too, wild deer and hare, wild wolf and bear, and every bird that flew. She heard the Indians trusted him. He knew the things they knew, which plants could heal or make a meal, which streams ran clear and true. He wandered all trails and heard all tales. His orchard spread and grew, and where he went, the deep rich scent of apple blossoms blew. Old Hannah Goodwin saw him last when many years had gone. He came in by the orchard gate, a quiet hour past dawn. Old Hannah knew that gentle smile, that face so long and thin. There was a Bible in his hand. He spoke of where he'd been. He walked all through America, and all his seeds he'd sown. He'd planted apples sharp and sweet, and swiftly they had grown. There was spicy apple cider now, out in the western plain. There was applesauce in Iowa, and apple pie in Maine. Apples crossed the wide Missouri and down the Ohio. Sharp and sweet across the land, they made our country grow. Old Hannah Goodwin offered thanks for her own trees grown so tall. He said no thanks were owed to him, the Lord had made them all. To grow a country or a tree takes just a planter who will seed and tend till the end, the earth's best dreams come true. He said farewell and traveled on, and did not come again. But in this orchard sharp and sweet, his apples still remain. Old Hannah Goodwin talked of him in apple time each year, when the orchard came to harvest and the air was crisp and clear. She'd ask children to remember and to thank the Lord indeed for apples sharp and apples sweet and Johnny Appleseed. Johnny Appleseed was a real person, although many of the tales told about him are probably not true. People have been telling about Johnny Appleseed stories for about 200 years, so it is sometimes hard to find the real history behind the legends. His name was John Chapman, and he was born in September of 1774 in Leominster, Massachusetts, the son of Nathaniel Chapman, a farmer and carpenter who fought in the American Revolutionary War, and his wife Elizabeth. We don't know much about John Chapman's childhood, except that he probably grew up in the Connecticut Valley. But in 1797, when he was 23 years old, he was seen traveling west to plant his famous apple seeds in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and northern Indiana. Many people don't know this, but he even owned land in those states and established nurseries there to raise and care for the apple trees he distributed to the settlers of the American frontier. Apples were very important to the wilderness settlements of the early Americas, as they were one of only a few crops that could be grown and harvested easily and eaten in one form or another all year round. On the other hand, few pioneering families had room to take seedling apple trees along with all of their household goods when they traveled west. John Chapman provided the answer for many people with his seeds and his nurseries. He became known by the name of Johnny Appleseed to grateful American settlers in the early 1800s. While he did not establish all of the original apple orchards in America, as people sometimes claim, he did play an important role in bringing apples to the frontier. John Chapman was also a devout Christian missionary who tried to explain and share his beliefs with whoever he traveled. He was a follower of Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish philosopher, who believed that we must live simply and in harmony with the natural world. John Chapman was said to have shown little interest in his personal appearance or in his possessions, but he had great love for all of humanity and all living things. He gave away his trees to any families who could not afford them, and his kindness towards wild creatures, from bears to wolves to rattlesnakes to wasps, is well recorded. He was respected by the Indians and moved freely among them. John Chapman was known to be especially fond of children. He spent much time during his travels telling his adventures to the youngest members of the households he visited. He died in Fort Wayne, Indiana in March of 1845, but his story, like the apple seeds he planted, will be part of our country forever. Welcome to Johnny Appleseed Week. I hope you enjoy.